I never thought betrayal had a sound until I heard the ping of that bank notification. It was a perfectly ordinary Friday in April. Poppy was sprawled across the living room floor with her science project, rain tapped against the windows, and the scent of the lasagna I'd made for Matt's birthday dinner filled our home. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing whispered warnings of the earthquake about to shatter the foundation of our family. If I'd known then what was coming, would I have done anything differently? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Probably not. Some disasters can't be prevented, only survived. Our life wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our routines, our comfortable patterns that formed the tapestry of our family. Every morning, Matt would kiss me goodbye before heading to his investment firm downtown. "Building our future," he'd say with that confident smile that had first attracted me 12 years ago. I'd wake Poppy for school, her wild, auburn curls a morning battle we'd fight together laughing. "Just like yours, Mom," she'd say, and I'd pretend to be offended while secretly loving that she had inherited something from me. I worked from home as a graphic designer, balancing client deadlines with being available for Poppy's after-school activities. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. It was ours. The kitchen table often doubled as both my workspace and Poppy's homework station, colored pencils mingling with my stylus and tablet. "When's Dad coming home?" Poppy would ask most evenings, and I'd check my watch. "Around 7, just like always," I'd reply, though lately, always had stretched to 8, sometimes 9. Matt had been working longer hours, his phone perpetually buzzing with what he called urgent client matters. I never checked his phone. Trust was our foundation, wasn't it? Our modest suburban home in Portland had become our sanctuary after years of careful saving and planning. We weren't wealthy, but we were secure, or so I thought. The college fund, for Poppy, had been Matt's idea. "My daughter isn't going to start adulthood with debt hanging over her head," he had insisted when she was just a toddler. Every month since then, a portion of both our paychecks disappeared into that untouchable account. "It's already at $43,000, Matt had proudly announced on Poppy's last birthday. "By the time she's 18, she'll have options that we never did, Lucia." He'd squeezed my shoulder then, and I'd leaned into him, grateful for his foresight. What? I didn't see what I somehow missed despite sharing a bed, a home, a life with this man, were the signs. The late nights that grew more frequent, the weekend golfing trips that left him unreachable for hours, the new cologne I didn't recognize, the password changes on his laptop, the way he no longer left his phone face up on the counter. Perhaps I didn't want to see. My father, Fred, had tried to warn me in his own way. "Something's off with that boy," he'd said during one of our rare phone conversations 6 months ago. But what did he know? Our relationship had fractured years ago when I chose love over his controlling disapproval. Captain Fred Martinelli of the Portland Police Department had never thought anyone was good enough for his only daughter, and I'd stopped trying to please him long before I met Matt. "Your father called again," I told Poppy one evening as she set the table for dinner. Matt was working late. Again. Grandpa Fred? Her eyes lit up in a way they rarely did for her father these days. "Did he say when he's coming to visit?" "Poppy, you know your father doesn't like Grandpa, I know." She rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair only a 10-year-old can muster. "But Grandpa's teaching me about forensics and fingerprints and stuff on our video calls. He says I'd make a great detective." I hadn't known they were having regular video calls. Something about that made me uneasy. Not because I minded her relationship with my father, but because it had been hidden from me, like so many things seem to be lately. "Your grandfather and I have a complicated history, sweetie," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes adults disagree about important things and can't find their way back to each other." "That's dumb," Poppy declared with the brutal honesty of childhood. He's your dad, and he's sorry. He told me so. I changed the subject then, not ready to untangle the knot of my relationship with Fred. Some wounds stay tender, even after years. That Friday, the Friday everything changed, had started normally enough. I'd spent the morning finalizing designs for a new client while Poppy was at school. Matt had texted that he'd be home early for his birthday dinner, and I'd splurged on ingredients for his favorite meal. 40 wasn't a milestone to be ignored, even if he had been joking about gray hairs for weeks. I was checking my email when the bank notification appeared on my screen. I nearly ignored it. Just another automatic alert, I thought. But something made me click. Your account balance has fallen below the minimum threshold. That was strange. Our joint savings account had more than enough to cover any automatic payments. I logged in, expecting to see some minor discrepancy, perhaps an error. The truth hit me like a physical blow. The account balance showed $212.47. Last week it had been over $15,000, our emergency fund, built slowly over years of careful budgeting. But more alarming was what I saw when I checked Poppy's college fund. 0. Not low, not reduced, but completely empty. Every dollar we'd saved for our daughter's future had vanished. The most recent transaction was a complete withdrawal, processed yesterday. Authorized by Matthew Reynolds. My hands shook as I tried to call him. Straight to voicemail. I tried again and again. Nothing. I must have looked like a ghost when Poppy came home from school, dropping her backpack by the door with her usual clatter. "Mom?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. "What's wrong?" I couldn't find the words. "How do you tell your child that the future you promised has been stolen? By the very person who helped create it." The sound of my phone buzzing broke the silence. A text message, not from Matt, but from a number I didn't recognize. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. I need to live my own life now. Lucia, you're strong. You and Poppy will be fine without me. Please don't try to contact me. It's over." Attached was a photo. Matt, his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen before, standing in what looked like an airport terminal. His wedding ring was noticeably absent. Poppy peered at my phone, her eyes widening. "Is that Dad? Who's that lady? Where is he going?" The lasagna continued to warm in the oven, filling our home with the scent of a celebration that would never happen. "Mom?" Poppy's voice sounded far away, though she stood right beside me. "Mom, what's happening?" I couldn't answer. My throat had closed around words that wouldn't come. I stared at the phone, at Matt's face, at his smile. The same smile he'd given me just that morning when he kissed me goodbye. "See you tonight," he'd said. "Can't wait for that birthday dinner." Another lie in a sea of deceptions I was only beginning to fathom. I forced myself to move, to function. "Go upstairs and start your homework, Poppy," I managed, my voice unnaturally calm. "I need to make some calls." "But, please," I said, sharper than I intended. "Just give me a minute." She retreated, her small shoulders hunched with worry, and a fresh wave of rage washed over me. Matt hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed her, his own daughter. I tried calling Matt again, and again, and again. Each time, straight to voicemail. I left messages, each one less controlled than the last. "Matt, there must be some mistake with the accounts. Call me." "Matt, where are you? What's going on? Please call me back." "Matt, you can't just take Poppy's college fund. That's her future. That's illegal." "Matt, I swear to God, if you don't call me back right now." My final message dissolved into tears and threats I didn't recognize as my own voice. Next, I called our bank. Yes, they confirmed the withdrawals were authorized. No, they couldn't reverse them without the account holder's consent. Yes, both our names were on the accounts, but Matt had changed the access permissions 2 weeks ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No, they hadn't contacted me because the request came through proper channels with all security questions answered correctly. Mrs. Reynolds, the customer service representative said gently, "This appears to be a domestic issue. I suggest you consult with a lawyer." A domestic issue. As if the systematic dismantling of our financial life could be reduced to such a sterile term. I hung up and tried Matt's office. His assistant, Penny, sounded confused. "Lucia, Matt gave his notice 3 weeks ago. Today was his last day. He said you both were relocating overseas for your work. Didn't you know? 3 weeks. He'd been planning this for at least 3 weeks. I called our credit card companies next. All cards canceled except one, which showed a $6,000 charge from United Airlines 2 days ago. 2 first-class tickets to Belize, non-refundable, non-transferable. When I finally dragged myself upstairs to check on Poppy, she wasn't doing homework. She was sitting on her bed, her laptop open, tears streaming down her face. "Dad's turning his phone on and off," she said without looking up. "I can tell from his location on our family tracking app. He's at the international terminal at PDX. I hadn't even thought to check the app. My 10-year-old was already 3 steps ahead of me. He's with someone named Rosie," she continued, her voice small but steady. "I found her on his Instagram. They've been commenting on each other's photos for months." She turned the laptop toward me. There they were, dozens of seemingly innocent comments stretching back nearly a year. Inside jokes, heart emojis, subtle references only someone looking closely would notice. "He told her he loved her 3 months ago," Poppy said, pointing to a particular exchange. "See? It's in code, but it's obvious." I felt sick. "How did you figure all this out so quickly?" She shrugged, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Grandpa Fred taught me how to investigate social media. He says digital footprints are the modern fingerprints." Of course, my police captain father had been teaching my daughter detective skills during their secret video calls. Any other day, I might have been angry about this. Today, I was just numb. I sat beside her on the bed, pulling her close. "I'm so sorry, Poppy." "Did he take all our money?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I hesitated, but she deserved the truth. "Yes, the emergency fund and your college fund, too." She pulled back, her eyes wide. "But that's my money. He always said it was for my future." "I know, sweetie, I know. Can we get it back?" I didn't have an answer that wouldn't frighten her more. "I'm going to try," was all I could promise. I tucked her in early that night, neither of us hungry enough for dinner. The birthday lasagna sat cooling in the kitchen, a reminder of the celebration that would never happen. After she fell into an exhausted sleep, I sat at our kitchen table with a legal pad, trying to make sense of our new reality. Without the emergency fund, we had maybe 2 months of mortgage payments in our checking account. My freelance work was steady, but not enough to cover all our expenses long term. Matt's salary had been our primary income. The college fund, over $43,000 that we'd been saving since Poppy was born, was gone. Our credit cards were maxed out. From what appeared to be weeks of secret purchases, high-end electronics, luxury clothing, vacation bookings. He'd been planning this meticulously, dismantling our life piece by piece while smiling at me across the dinner table. Around midnight, I tried calling his phone one more time. To my surprise, it rang. "Matt," I said when he answered, my voice breaking. "How could you?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Lucia, I was going to call tomorrow, once we'd landed. This isn't how I wanted to do this." "How you wanted to do what, Matt? Steal our savings? Abandon your daughter? Run off with another woman?" "I've been unhappy for years," he said, as if this justified everything. "You and I both know our marriage has been on autopilot. Rosie makes me feel alive again." "So divorce me," I shouted. File for separation. Don't steal from your own child. I needed a fresh start, he said, his voice maddeningly calm. Completely fresh. No ties, no obligations. Poppy is not an obligation. She's your daughter. And I'll send support when I can. But right now, this is what I need. I'm sorry if that hurts you. If that hurts me? You took her college fund, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Everything we saved for her future. She's 10. There's plenty of time to save again. I could hear the airport announcement system in the background, calling for final boarding to Belize City. I have to go, he said. Our flight's boarding. Look, I'll be in touch in a few weeks when things settle down. Matt, don't you dare. But he was already gone. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Matt's face, smiling at me while he planned his escape. I saw Poppy's future, the one we'd promised her, vanishing with every dollar he'd stolen. Morning came with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't bothered to close. I made coffee on autopilot, staring at the lasagna still sitting in the cold oven. Matt's birthday dinner. I threw the entire dish into the trash, ceramic and all, taking grim satisfaction in the sound of it shattering at the bottom of the bin. When Poppy came downstairs, her eyes were puffy from crying, but her expression was determined. We need to call Grandpa Fred, she said without preamble. Absolutely not. The response was automatic, visceral. Mom, he's a police captain. Dad stole our money. That's a crime. It's complicated, Poppy. Legally, he had access to those accounts. But it was my college fund. Her voice rose, cracking slightly. He always said it was for me. I closed my eyes, wishing I could shield her from this harsh introduction to adult betrayals. I know, sweetheart, and we're going to figure this out. But we don't need your grandfather involved. Why not? Because you're too proud? The accusation stung, precisely because it contained a kernel of truth. Pride had kept me from reconciling with my father for years. Pride and old wounds that had never properly healed. It's not about pride, I lied. It's about handling this ourselves. That's dumb, she said, echoing her words from just yesterday, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Grandpa can help. He deals with bad guys all the time. Her simple framing, her father as just another bad guy for her grandfather to handle, broke my heart all over again. Your father isn't a bad guy, Poppy. He's just... I trailed off, unsure how to explain a midlife crisis, infidelity, and financial theft in terms a 10-year-old could process. He stole my college money and ran away with another lady, Poppy said flatly. That makes him a bad guy. Out of the mouths of babes. I spent the morning making calls, to our mortgage company, to my clients to ask for expedited payments, to Matt's company to see if he had any outstanding commission checks, to a lawyer I couldn't afford. Each conversation left me more desperate than the last. Without a court order, our hands are tied, the bank manager explained apologetically during our in-person meeting. Since Mr. Reynolds was an authorized user on all accounts, the withdrawals weren't technically fraudulent. But it was our daughter's college fund, I insisted. He wasn't supposed to touch that. Was there a legal document stating that restriction? There wasn't, of course. We'd trusted each other. Or rather, I had trusted Matt. The lawyer was equally discouraging. Without a prenuptial agreement specifying the college fund as separate property, it's considered marital assets. Technically, he had a right to withdraw it. What about abandonment? Theft? Something? I pleaded. We can certainly pursue this in family court, she said, but these cases take time. Months, sometimes years, especially if he's left the country. And given what you've told me about your financial situation... She didn't need to finish. I couldn't afford a protracted legal battle. Matt had made sure of that. Throughout it all, Poppy kept suggesting we call her grandfather. Each time, I refused. Fred Martinelli and I hadn't spoken directly in nearly 2 years, not since my mother's funeral where he'd tried once again to warn me about Matt. He's hiding something, Lucia. A cop knows these things. I'd accused him of never giving Matt a chance, of trying to control my life even as an adult. We'd parted on bitter terms. Calling him now would mean admitting he'd been right all along. The thought was unbearable. By Sunday evening, 2 days after Matt's disappearance, reality had settled in. I'd need to find a full-time job with benefits, something that paid more than my freelance design work. We might need to sell the house. Poppy would have to transfer from her private school to public. The future we'd planned had evaporated overnight. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and budget calculations, when my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "How's my favorite junior detective? Grandpa misses you. Video call tomorrow?" It was meant for Poppy. Fred must not have realized he'd texted my phone instead of calling her tablet directly. Before I could decide what to do, Poppy appeared beside me, having heard the notification. "Is that Grandpa?" she asked, peering at my screen. I handed her the phone. "He texted me by mistake." She read the message, then looked at me with determination in her eyes. "I'm calling him right now." "Poppy, no." But she was already dialing, putting the phone on speaker before I could. "Stop her, Poppy girl!" My father's voice, warm and affectionate in a way he rarely was with me, filled the kitchen. "I must have texted your mom's phone by accident." "It's okay, Grandpa," she said. "Mom's right here, and we need your help." I could have grabbed the phone. I could have ended the call. Instead, I found myself frozen, listening as my daughter explained everything to my father. The emptied accounts, the other woman, the flight to Belize, all of it laid out with a clarity that was startling from a 10-year-old. There was silence when she finished. Then my father's voice, different now. This was Captain Martinelli speaking. "Put your mother on, Poppy." She handed me the phone, her expression both defiant and pleading. I took it, switching off the speaker. "Hi, Dad," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Lucia. Just my name, but it contained multitudes: concern, vindication, hesitation. "Poppy shouldn't have called you," I began. "Stop," he interrupted. "Is what she told me accurate?" I sighed. "Yes." Another silence. I could almost see him, sitting in his study, processing the information, formulating a plan. Fred Martinelli never reacted emotionally to crises. It was what made him a good cop and a difficult father. "Have you filed a police report?" he asked. "The bank says since he was an authorized user." Not asking what the bank said, asking if you filed a report. "No." "Have you contacted a lawyer?" "Yes." But she says, "What's the lawyer's name?" I told him. "Sandra Patel? She's good. Listen to her." A pause. "Have you checked your credit report? Frozen your accounts?" I hadn't. The thought hadn't even occurred to me. "No," I admitted. "Do it tonight. He could have opened cards in your name." Another pause. "I'm coming over tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. We'll make a plan." Pride surged up in me. "Dad, I don't need you to—" "This isn't about you, Lucia," he cut in, his voice sharp but not unkind. "This is about my granddaughter's future. 7 a.m. He hung up before I could argue further. Poppy stood in the doorway, watching me. "Is Grandpa coming to help?" I nodded, conflicted emotions tightening my chest. "Tomorrow morning." Her relief was palpable. "Good. He'll know what to do." Her faith in her grandfather was absolute, untouched by the complicated history between us. To her, he was simply the hero who would fix this nightmare. I wished I could share her certainty. That night, following my father's instructions, I checked my credit report. Sure enough, there were 3 new credit cards I hadn't opened, all maxed out. Matt had been busy. I froze my credit, feeling sick, at how thoroughly he'd prepared his escape, how completely he'd violated every trust. As I tucked Poppy into bed, she asked the question I'd been dreading. Mom, why did Dad do this? Didn't he love us anymore? I sat on the edge of her bed, searching for words that wouldn't crush her. Sometimes people change in ways we can't understand. It doesn't mean we did anything wrong. But he took my college money, she said, her voice small. He always told me that was my future. I know, sweetie, and we're going to figure it out, I promise. A promise I had no idea how to keep. Grandpa will help us get it back, she said with such conviction that I almost believed it. We'll see, was all I could offer. After she fell asleep, I went through Matt's closet. Half empty, though he'd been careful to leave enough that I wouldn't notice at a glance. In the back, I found a small safe we'd bought years ago for important documents. It had always been locked, with Matt keeping the key. Now it stood open and empty. What had he kept in there that he'd needed to take? More secrets I hadn't been privy to? On his nightstand, a framed photo of the three of us at Poppy's last birthday had been carefully positioned, as if he wanted to create the impression of a man who still cherished his family, even as he abandoned them. I picked it up, studying. His smile. Had it been genuine then? Or had he already been planning his escape, counting down the days until he could shed us like an unwanted skin? With a sudden violent motion, I hurled the frame across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying crash, glass shattering across the carpet. The sound matched something breaking inside me, the last of my shock giving way to rage. Kneeling to clean up the mess, I noticed something beneath a shard of glass, a small slip of paper that had been hidden behind the photo in the frame. A receipt from a jewelry store dated 3 months ago, an emerald necklace. $4,200. I'd never received an emerald necklace. But Rosie, in that airport photo with Matt, had been wearing something green around her neck. The final confirmation I didn't need. Matt hadn't just left us. He'd been crafting a parallel life for months, funding his new beginning with our family's future. I slept on the couch that night, unable to face our bed. Tomorrow my father would arrive with his captain's authority and his iron certainty. Tomorrow I would have to accept his help, and with it, his inevitable, "I told you so." But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the full measure of my rage. Not just for me, but for Poppy, whose innocence Matt had stolen along with her college fund. One thought kept circling in my mind as I drifted into uneasy sleep. I would get back what he took from her. Whatever it cost me, whatever pride I had to swallow, I would make this right for my daughter. My father arrived exactly at 7, not a minute earlier or later. Military punctuality, a habit from his years in the Marines before joining the police. Horse! I opened the door before he could knock, not wanting him to wake Poppy. Fred Martinelli stood on my porch looking exactly as I remembered. Ramrod straight posture, silver crew cut, weathered face set in neutral lines that gave nothing away. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans and a button-down shirt, but the badge clipped to his belt made it clear he was still very much on duty. "Lucia," he said with a slight nod. "Dad," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. We stood awkwardly, in the entryway, 2 years of silence stretching between us like a physical barrier. He surveyed the living room with sharp eyes that missed nothing, the scattered papers on the coffee table, the empty wine glass from last night, the general disarray of a household in crisis. "You look tired," he said finally. "That's what happens when your husband cleans out your accounts and runs off with another woman." I regretted the sharpness in my voice immediately, but Fred didn't flinch. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the kitchen table. "Let's talk through this." For the next hour, we did exactly that. Despite everything, I had to admit there was comfort in my father's methodical approach. He asked precise questions, made notes in a small black notebook he pulled from his pocket, and showed no reaction to even the most humiliating details. "So he's in Belize," he said after I finished my account. With approximately $60,000 of your money, plus whatever he charged to those fraudulent credit cards. That's the summary. Yes. My coffee had gone cold, but I sipped it anyway, needing the bitter taste to ground me. Belize has no extradition treaty with the U.S., Fred observed. Smart choice on his part. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, it's supposed to help you understand what we're up against. He tapped his pen against his notebook. This isn't just about the money, Lucia. The identity theft with those credit cards. That's a felony. Something about hearing it described in such clinical, legal terms made it all feel more real. Kendao. You arrest him? I asked. Not in Belize, but we can build a case. If he ever sets foot back in the U.S., yes. He looked at me directly. You need to decide if that's what you want. I stared at him. What I want? He stole my daughter's future. Of course I want him arrested. Fred's expression didn't change. Many spouses reconsider once the initial shock wears off. Family dynamics are complicated. I've seen enough domestic cases to know. This isn't just a domestic dispute, I said, anger flaring. He committed fraud. He stole from his own child. I'm aware. He held my gaze steadily. Just making sure you are too. Before I could respond, Poppy appeared in the doorway, still, in her pajamas, her face lighting up at the sight of my father. Grandpa! She launched herself at him with none of the hesitation that marked our reunion. To my surprise, Fred's stern expression softened as he hugged her. There's my junior detective, he said, his voice warmer than I'd heard it in years. Are you going to help us catch Dad? She asked, pulling back to look at him. Fred glanced at me before answering. We're working on a plan, he said carefully. Your mom and I are figuring out the best approach. I already started, Poppy announced, running to get her tablet from the living room. She returned and pulled up a document. I've been tracking everything. Look. I leaned over to see what had my daughter so excited. She had created a detailed spreadsheet titled Dad's Crimes, with categories for financial transactions, timeline of suspicious activities, and even a section labeled Evidence Collected. Fred studied it with raised eyebrows. Impressive work, Detective Poppy. I remembered what you taught me about documenting everything, she said proudly. And I found more stuff this morning. She swiped to a social media page I didn't recognize. This is Rosie's Instagram. I found it through Dad's account yesterday, but it was set to private. This morning it was public again, and look, she pointed to a recent post, a beach selfie of Matt and Rosie, cocktails in hand, sun setting behind them. The caption read, New life, new beginnings with my soulmate. Belize. Fresh start. No regrets, no. Regrets. The casual cruelty of it made my stomach turn. He's staying at the Seaside Villas Resort, Poppy continued, pointing to a location tag on the post. I looked it up. It's really expensive. I glanced at my father, who was watching Poppy, with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between pride and concern. That's excellent detective work, he told her. But I think your mom and I need to talk privately for a bit. Can you give us a few minutes? Poppy looked disappointed but nodded. I'll keep investigating, she said, taking her tablet with her, as she left the kitchen. When she was out of earshot, Fred turned to me. She's been learning quite a bit during your estrangement. There was no accusation in his tone, but I felt defensive anyway. I didn't know you were teaching her to be a spy. Not a spy, an observer. He closed his notebook. She's got a natural talent for it. Notices things most adults miss. She shouldn't have to notice these things. She shouldn't be making spreadsheets of her father's crimes. No, he agreed. She shouldn't. But she's trying to make sense of something senseless, using the tools she has. I couldn't argue with that. Here's what we're going to do, Fred said, switching back to his captain's voice. First, I'm calling in a favor with a colleague at the Financial Crimes Unit. The credit card fraud gives us leverage, even if the account withdrawals are in a legal gray area. Will that get our money back? Potentially, but not quickly. In the meantime, you need practical solutions. He pulled out his checkbook. I'm giving you... No, I cut him off. I'm not taking your money. His jaw tightened. This isn't charity, Lucia. It's for my granddaughters. Future. We'll manage. Fred set down his pen with deliberate control. Your pride is the reason we haven't spoken in 2 years. Are you going to let it hurt Poppy now? The words hit with the precision of a sniper. He'd always known exactly where to aim. That's not fair, I said, my voice low. None of this is fair. But it's the reality we're dealing with. He slid the checkbook back into his pocket. Think about it. The offer stands. He stood up. I need to make some calls. You should shower, eat something. You look like hell. It was such a dad thing to say that I almost smiled despite everything. I'm going to find him, Lucia, he said, his voice softening slightly. Matt won't get away with this. Even in Belize? Even in Belize. There was something in his expression that reminded me of the bedtime stories he'd told me as a child. Tales of justice always prevailing, of bad guys always getting caught. Back then, I'd believed every word. Now, I wasn't so sure. How? I asked. Let me worry about that. You focus on keeping things stable for Poppy. He hesitated, then added, and maybe consider what she said yesterday. About me helping. I'm considering it, I admitted. That's why you're here. He nodded once, a gesture that acknowledged the small olive branch I'd extended. Progress, he said, and left to make his calls from the porch. In the living room, I found Poppy still engrossed in her tablet, her small face scrunched in concentration. What are you working on now, detective? I asked, sitting beside her. She showed me her screen. I'm tracking Rosie's friends too. Look what I found. It was a post from someone named Seth, tagged with both Rosie and Matt. Farewell dinner for the escape artists. Belize is lucky to have you. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. They were planning this for a while, Poppy said, her voice small, but steady. Seth knew they were leaving. I stared at the photo. Matt, Rosie, and a man I assumed was Seth, raising glasses in a toast. Matt was wearing a watch I'd given him for our anniversary. Do you think Seth knows where our money is? Poppy asked. I glanced toward the porch, where my father was pacing, phone to his ear, every inch the captain on a mission. I don't know. Honey. But I think Grandpa might be able to find out. For the first time since that bank notification had pinged on my phone, I felt a glimmer of something like hope. Not because I believed we'd get the money back, that still seemed like a remote possibility, but because we weren't alone in this fight anymore. My father had been right about Matt all along. Swallowing that truth was bitter medicine, but perhaps it was time to take it. By Monday afternoon, my kitchen had transformed into what Poppy excitedly called Command Central. My father had returned with his laptop, a printer, and a determination that both intimidated and reassured me. He'd taken a week of personal leave, something I'd never known him to do in his entire career. Dad, you didn't have to. Yes, I did, he said simply, setting up his equipment with military efficiency. Poppy hovered nearby, absorbing everything, asking questions that Fred answered with surprising patience. Their easy rapport was both heartwarming and painful to witness, a relationship that had flourished in the margins of my estrangement. I'd called my clients to explain I needed a few days off for a family emergency. Most were understanding, though I couldn't help calculating the income I'd lose. Income we desperately needed now. Around 3 o'clock, Fred's phone rang. He checked the caller ID and stepped onto the porch to take it. When he returned, his expression had shifted subtly. Slight tightening around the eyes that I recognized from childhood as his "We have a situation, face." "What is it?" I asked. That was Detective Gino Romano from Financial Crimes. He glanced at Poppy, who was pretending not to eavesdrop while doodling in her notebook. "Let's talk in the kitchen." Once we were alone, Fred lowered his voice. "Matt's cash withdrawals weren't just from your accounts. There are discrepancies at his firm. Client funds missing, irregularities in accounting. Romano thinks Matt may have been embezzling for months." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. "Embezzling? That's not possible. Matt wouldn't—" "The evidence suggests otherwise," Fred interrupted gently. "Initial estimates put it at close to $200,000. I gripped the counter to steady myself. $200,000? How could he possibly hide that? Same way he hid his affair. Compartmentalization. Secret accounts. Fred's expression was carefully neutral. The firm is cooperating with the investigation, but they're keeping it quiet for now. They don't want clients panicking. So this isn't just about our money anymore, I said, the implications dawning on me. This is much bigger. It changes things, Fred acknowledged. The stakes are higher, but so are our chances of getting him extradited. Financial institutions have international reach that domestic disputes don't. Will I be implicated? The question slipped out before I could stop it, a fear I hadn't even acknowledged to myself. Fred's expression softened. Romano found no evidence linking you to any of it. All transactions were under Matt's credentials, from devices registered to him alone. The relief I felt was quickly replaced by a new horror. What if I'd been wrong about Matt at an even more fundamental level? What if he wasn't just a selfish husband who'd abandoned his family, but a criminal who'd been leading a double life for years? "What do we tell Poppy?" I whispered. "The truth, but measured," Fred advised. "She's already processing her father's betrayal. She doesn't need to know the full scope yet." I nodded, trying to gather my composure before returning to the living room. But when we stepped out of the kitchen, Poppy was standing there, her tablet clutched to her chest, her expression too knowing for her 10 years. "Dad stole from his work too, didn't he?" she asked quietly. I exchanged a glance with Fred, who gave a slight nod. "Yes," I admitted. "It looks that way." "I already knew," she said, sitting down on the couch. "I found the other bank accounts." "What other accounts?" Fred asked sharply. Poppy pulled up a document on her tablet. "Dad used the same password for everything. I logged into his email and found statements from banks I didn't recognize." She handed the tablet to Fred, who studied it with narrowed eyes before looking at her with newfound respect. "How did you know to look for this?" She shrugged. "You told me criminals usually keep patterns in their behavior. Dad always used the same password, my birthday plus Mom's initials. I figured he wouldn't change that, even for secret stuff." Fred turned to me. "She needs to speak with Romano." "Absolutely not," I protested. "She's 10 years old. I don't want her involved in a criminal investigation." "She's already involved," Fred pointed out, "and she's found evidence that could be crucial." "I want to help," Poppy insisted. "It's my college money, too." I looked between them, my father, the unyielding captain, and my daughter, with that same determined set to her jaw that I saw in the mirror every day. 2 generations of Martinelli stubbornness united against me. "Fine," I relented. "But I'm present for any discussions, and she only shares what she's already found. No additional investigating." Poppy's triumphant smile dimmed slightly at the restriction, but she nodded. Within an hour, Detective Romano arrived, a compact, energy-efficient man with quick eyes and a gentle manner that put even me at ease. He spoke to Poppy with none of the condescension adults often show children, asking thoughtful questions about her discoveries. "This is impressive work," he told her, reviewing the accounts she'd found. "You've saved us considerable time." Poppy beamed under the praise. "Can you get our money back?" Romano exchanged a glance with Fred. "We're going to try. These offshore accounts complicate things, but they also give us more to work with. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the true scope of Matt's deception emerged through Romano's careful questioning and Poppy's surprisingly methodical evidence. Matt hadn't just stolen from us and his firm, he'd created an entire shadow financial system, moving money through a series of accounts across multiple countries. It's not amateur work, Romano observed. He either had help or he's been planning this for a very long time. The thought made me physically ill. How long had my husband been living this double life? Had anything between us been real? Sensing my distress, Fred suggested Romano take Poppy's tablet to make copies of her findings, giving us a moment alone. You couldn't have known, he said once they'd stepped outside. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging his earlier warnings about Matt. I should have, I whispered. There were signs, small things that never quite added up. I just didn't want to see them. Because you loved him, Fred said, not unkindly. Love makes us selective in what we choose to see. Coming from my stoic, by-the-book father, this insight was unexpected. For a moment, I glimpsed the pain he must have felt watching me ignore his warnings. Not just the satisfaction of being right, but the helplessness of not being able to protect his daughter. I'm sorry, I said, the words encompassing more than just this moment. For not listening, for shutting you out. He nodded once, accepting the apology without needing to dissect it. We focus on what's ahead now, getting your money back, building a case against Matt. And if we can't get the money back? Fred's expression hardened with determination. Then we make sure he pays another way. No one steals my granddaughter's future and gets away with it. The fierce protectiveness in his voice reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten, what it felt like to have Captain Fred Martinelli in your corner. As a teenager, I'd resented his overprotective nature. Now, with my own child's future at stake, I found myself grateful for it. When Poppy and Romano returned, something had shifted in her expression. She looked almost excited. Mom, she said, barely containing herself. I found something else. Detective Romano says it could be really important. Romano nodded confirmation. Your daughter discovered a recurring payment from one of the hidden accounts to a property management company in Belize. We think Matt may have purchased real estate there. Not just any real estate, Poppy added, practically bouncing. A beach house. And guess what? It's right next to the Seaside Villas resort where he's staying now. The implication was clear. Matt hadn't just fled on impulse. He'd been establishing a new life there, piece by piece, for months. This gives us leverage, Romano explained. Real estate creates a paper trail we can follow, and property can be seized under international financial crime statutes. For the first time since that fateful bank notification, I felt a spark of hope. Not just that we might recover some of what was lost, but that Matt would face consequences for what he'd done. What happens next? I asked. Now, Fred said, the glint in his eye reminiscent of the hero from my childhood bedtime stories. We build a trap. Building a trap sounded like something from an action movie, not like a solution, to my very real, very devastating financial disaster. But over the next 2 days, I watched as my father and Detective Romano, with Poppy's eager assistance, constructed exactly that. Matt thinks he's safe in Belize, Fred explained as we gathered around the kitchen table Tuesday morning. That's his first mistake. What's his second? I asked. Underestimating you, Fred replied, his eyes meeting mine with unexpected confidence. And Poppy. Romano spread out printouts of Matt's financial transactions, property records for the Belize beach, house, and screenshots of social media posts that Poppy had compiled. We need to approach this from multiple angles, he explained. Financial, legal, and psychological. Psychological? I repeated. Romano nodded. People who commit these kinds of crimes often have predictable patterns of behavior. From what we've Gathered, your husband is narcissistic, overconfident, and believes he's smarter than everyone else. I couldn't argue with that assessment. Matt had always prided himself on being the cleverest person in any room. So how do we use that against him? I asked. We make him think he's winning, Fred said with the calm certainty that had defined his career. Then we let his overconfidence do the rest. The plan they outlined was both simple and complex. First, Romano would freeze as many of Matt's known accounts as possible through international banking protocols. Not the ones in Belize, not yet, but enough to create financial pressure. He'll need to access additional funds soon, Romano predicted. The lifestyle he's displaying on social media isn't sustainable on what he has immediately available. Then, what? I asked. Then, Fred said, we make him an offer he thinks he can manipulate. This was where things got complicated, and where I was expected to play a role I wasn't sure I could stomach. We need you to contact him, Romano explained, to tell him you want to work things out, that you're willing to negotiate. That's insane, I protested. He'll never believe I'd take him back after what he did. Not take him back, Fred clarified. Just that you're willing to discuss divorce terms without involving authorities. Make him think you're too proud to admit being scammed, too embarrassed to press charges. Play to his ego, Romano added. Let him think he's controlling the situation. Meanwhile, Fred continued, we'll be building the legal case, documenting everything, and preparing to move once he shows his hand. I looked at their expectant faces, doubt gnawing at me. This feels like a long shot. What if he doesn't respond? What if he's already spent all the money? Then we go to Plan B, Fred said matter-of-factly. Which is? International warrants, extradition requests, and freezing all his assets in Belize, Romano supplied. But that's much slower and gives him time to disappear again. This way, Fred added, we use his narcissism against him. He thinks he's untouchable. Let's let him keep thinking that while we close the net. As the adults talked strategy, I noticed Poppy had gone unusually quiet, staring intently at her tablet. What are you thinking, sweetie? I asked. She looked up, her expression thoughtful. Dad always liked it when people told him he was smart, she said slowly. Even when he messed up, if you told him he was clever about it, he'd get all puffy. Puffy? Romano echoed. You know, like a peacock, she explained, making a gesture with her hands. All proud and showing off. Fred nodded with approval. Good observation, Detective Poppy. So, she continued, warming to her theory, what if Mom doesn't just say she wants to talk? What if she tells him she's impressed by what he did? Like, she's mad, but also thinks he was really smart about it? The three adults exchanged glances. That's actually brilliant, Romano said. Stroke his ego. Make him want to explain his cleverness. People who think they've gotten away with the perfect crime often want an audience to appreciate it, Fred agreed. It's why criminals sometimes insert themselves into investigations. I stared at my daughter, this child who somehow understood her father's psychology with a clarity I'd never achieved in 12 years of marriage. Could that work? I asked Romano. It's definitely worth trying, he confirmed. But the approach needs to be perfect. Too eager, and he'll suspect a trap. Too hostile, and he'll shut down. I know how to talk to him, I said with growing confidence. I've been managing his ego for years. As we refined the plan throughout the day, another unexpected catalyst emerged, this one from Poppy's continued social media surveillance. Mom, look at this, she called from the living room where she'd been monitoring Rosie's Instagram. They had a fight. I joined her on the couch, peering at her tablet. Sure enough, Rosie had posted a series of cryptic messages. Trust is everything. Followed by, some people never change. And finally, a photo of a tropical sunset with the caption, contemplating my choices. That's from this morning, Poppy noted. And Dad hasn't been tagged in any of her posts since yesterday. Fred, who had joined us, studied the posts with interest. "Trouble in paradise," he observed. "This could work to our advantage." "How?" I asked. "Isolation makes people vulnerable," he explained. "If he's having problems with Rosie, he'll be looking for validation elsewhere, more susceptible to your outreach." The thought of exploiting Matt's relationship troubles, even with someone he'd left me for, felt manipulative in a way that made me uncomfortable. But then I remembered the empty college fund, the maxed-out credit cards in my name, the shattered future he'd left us with. "Let's do it," I decided. "When do we make contact?" "Tonight," Fred advised, "when he's likely to be alone. After dinner in Belize." Romano nodded agreement. "Keep it simple, ask to talk. Hint that you're willing to make a deal outside official channels, then see how he responds. And remember," Fred added, "everything he says is evidence. Record all. Communications." That evening, as the appointed time approached, I found myself surprisingly nervous. What if Matt saw through our plan immediately? What if he'd already moved the money somewhere untraceable? Poppy sensed my anxiety and sat beside me on the couch, leaning against my shoulder. "You can do this, Mom," she said with complete confidence. "Just remember what Grandpa says. Bad guys always make mistakes because they think they're smarter than everyone else." I wrapped an arm around her, drawing strength from her unwavering faith. "When did you get so wise?" She shrugged. "Grandpa says I take after you. The smart part, not the stubborn part." From across the room, Fred cleared his throat, not quite hiding a smile. At exactly 9 p.m., with Fred and Romano positioned nearby but out of frame, I made the video call to Matt's phone. My heart pounded as the connection tone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then suddenly his face filled my screen. He looked tanned, slightly disheveled, and wary. "Lucia?" His surprise seemed genuine. "I didn't expect to hear from you." I took a deep breath, channeling every acting skill I possessed. "We need to talk, Matt," I said, keeping my voice steady. "About the money, about the divorce, about how we handle this going forward." His expression shifted. Surprise-giving, weighed a calculation, then cautious interest. "I'm listening," he said. And just like that, our trap was baited. I studied Matt's face on my screen. The face I'd woken up beside for 12 years, now bronzed by a foreign sun and guarded in a way I'd never seen before. In the background, I could make out an upscale hotel room with sliding doors opening to a balcony, ocean waves visible beyond. "You look good," he said, filling the silence. I resisted the urge to laugh bitterly. I looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, and we both knew it. "Let's skip the small talk," I replied. "I think we're past that." He nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "How's Poppy?" The audacity of his concern sent a flash of anger through me, but I remembered Romano's coaching. "Stay calm. Play to his ego. Make him think he's in control." "She's confused," I said truthfully. "Hurt. Trying to understand why her dad emptied her college fund and left without saying goodbye." A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed his face. "I was going to call her, to explain things." "With what explanation, Matt? What could possibly justify what you did?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar, it made my chest ache despite everything. "Look, Lucia, our marriage was over long before I left. We both know that. I just found a way out that worked for me." "By stealing from your daughter?" I kept my voice level with effort. "I'll pay it back," he said quickly. "Once I'm settled, once things are stable." I never meant for Poppy to suffer. The rehearsed quality of his response told me he'd anticipated this conversation, prepared these empty promises in advance. "That's actually why I'm calling," I said, shifting tactics. "I've been thinking about how to handle this situation." His posture changed subtly, more alert, more cautious. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. I could report the credit card fraud, the identity theft. I could let your firm know about the client funds. I could make this very public and very ugly. His face hardened. Is that a threat? It's a reality check, I countered. But I'm not calling to threaten you, Matt. I'm calling because I think there's a better way forward for all of us. Interest replaced wariness in his expression. I'm listening. I want a clean break, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. No protracted legal battles, no criminal charges, no reputation-destroying public scandal. What are you proposing? Return. Poppy's college fund. Pay off the fraudulent credit cards in my name. Sign divorce papers that give me the house. Do that and I'll look the other way on everything else. Matt studied me, suspicion clear in his eyes. Why would you offer that? What's the catch? Here came the difficult part. The performance Fred and Romano had coached me on extensively. Because dragging this out hurts Poppy more than anyone, I said. And because, I have to admit, as angry as I am, part of me is impressed. Impressed? He repeated, clearly caught off guard. I forced myself to continue, each word tasting like, esh. You orchestrated the perfect escape. Multiple accounts, offshore transfers, a property already waiting in Belize. It was thorough, strategic. I paused, meeting his eyes through the screen. I never knew you had it in you. The effect was immediate. Matt's posture straightened, his expression shifting from guarded to almost preening. I'd struck the exact chord Fred predicted. Vanity, the desire for recognition of his cleverness. It wasn't impulsive, he acknowledged, warming to the topic. I've been planning for nearly a year. That long? I kept my tone conversational, as if we were discussing a business venture rather than the systematic destruction of our family. You have to be careful with these things, he explained, fully engaged now. Move too quickly, raise red flags. So I did it in stages. Small transfers, converted to cryptocurrency, then back to cash in different jurisdictions. Every word was another nail in his legal coffin, and he had no idea. Behind the camera, I saw Fred giving me a subtle thumbs up. That's impressive, I managed. And the beach house? Poppy saw it tagged in one of Rosie's posts. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of Rosie, confirming our suspicion about trouble in his new relationship. That was the trickiest part, he admitted after a moment's hesitation. Had to use a shell company, route the purchase through, a third party. But worth it. Beachfront property in Belize is a solid investment. Smart, I said, the compliment burning my throat. Always thinking ahead. He shrugged, false modesty barely concealing his pride. I had to secure our future, mine, and Rosie's. Speaking of Rosie, I ventured carefully, her recent posts seemed tense. Everything okay? Matt's expression clouded. She's having trouble adjusting. Thought this would be all champagne and sunsets. Didn't realize setting up a new life takes work. I nodded sympathetically, as if his relationship struggles deserved compassion. That must be difficult, especially after all your careful planning. She'll come around, he said with less conviction than his words implied. Or she won't. I've got options. The casual cruelty of this statement, this readiness to discard Rosie just as he'd discarded us, strengthened my resolve to see our plan through. So, I redirected, about my proposal. Poppy's college fund, the credit cards, the house. In exchange for my silence. Matt leaned back, visibly calculating. The college fund might be complicated to access now. It's been moved several times. But not impossible, I pressed, for someone with your financial expertise. The flattery worked. He smiled, that same confident smile that had once made me feel safe, now revealing the predator beneath. Not impossible, he agreed. But the credit cards, that's over $30,000, and the house is worth at least $300. Against potential prison time for fraud and embezzlement? I countered. Seems like a bargain. He flinched slightly at the word embezzlement, confirming another of our suspicions. He didn't know how much we knew about the client funds. How about this? He proposed, shifting to negotiation mode. Half the college fund now as a show of good faith. We discuss the rest once I have written assurance you won't pursue charges. Fred had warned me he might counter this way. I shook my head. Full college fund first, transferred to a new account I'll set up. Then we talk about the rest. Lucia, those are my terms, Matt. Take them or leave them. He studied me for a long moment, doubt and calculation warring in his expression. I'll need a few days, he said finally, to arrange the transfer. 3 days, I said firmly. Then I want proof the money is back in Poppy's name. Fine. He paused, then asked, How is she really, Poppy? The genuine concern in his voice almost undid me. How dare he still pretend to care? How dare he ask about the child whose future he'd stolen? She's resilient, I said, my voice tight. More than either of us gave her credit for. Something in. My tone must have alerted him. His eyes narrowed. She's not part of this call, is she? Not listening? No. Not technically a lie. Poppy was in the next room with Romano, not directly listening. Good. He nodded, seemingly relieved. I do want to talk to her when the time is right, to explain things my way. Your way? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. She's a child, Lucia. She won't understand the complexities of adult relationships, of needing to start over. I don't want her thinking I'm the villain in this story. But you are, I thought. You are exactly the villain. Out loud, I merely said, We'll discuss that after the money is returned. 3 days, he confirmed. I'll be in touch. The screen went dark as he ended the call. I slumped back against the couch, suddenly exhausted from the performance. Fred moved immediately to my side. You did well, he said, his voice gruff with approval. Better than well. You got him talking, got him to admit to planning it, to using shell companies. Romano recorded everything. Will it be enough? I asked. Combined with what we already have? Romano said, joining us. It's substantial, especially his admission about the property and the shell company. That's textbook money laundering. But he's still in Belize, I pointed out. Still out of reach. For now, Fred agreed. But you've set the hook. The next step is to reel him in. Poppy appeared in the doorway, her expression solemn. Did Dad agree to give back my college money? I hesitated, not wanting to get her hopes up. He said he would return it in 3 days. But you don't believe him, she said, not a question but a statement. No, honey, I don't. She nodded, unsurprised. That's okay. Grandpa's plan doesn't need Dad to tell the truth. It just needs him to think we believe him. I glanced at Fred, who shrugged. She figured it out on her own. Like I said, she takes after you. For the first time in days, I felt a genuine smile form. So what's the next step in this master plan? Fred's expression turned grim. Now, we follow the money. Every account he mentioned, every transfer, and we prepare for what happens when he realizes he's been outplayed. He'll run, I predicted. Let him try. Fred replied with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent 4 decades catching people who thought they could escape justice. Some traps only close tighter when you struggle. The promised 3 days stretched into an anxious waiting game. My father insisted I continue with normal routines, sending Poppy to school, handling client work, maintaining the appearance that nothing extraordinary was happening. Don't give Matt any reason to suspect we're doing more than waiting for his transfer, he cautioned. But behind this facade of normalcy, an impressive operation was taking shape. Romano had brought in a financial crimes specialist named Sandra Chen, a sharp-eyed woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of international banking regulations. She set up camp at my dining room table, her laptop surrounded by stacks of printouts and legal documents. He mentioned cryptocurrency, she explained, highlighting transactions on a spreadsheet. That's trackable, contrary to popular belief. Every transaction leaves a digital signature. Can we recover the funds? I asked. She gave me a measured look. Some of it, potentially. The challenge isn't just finding the money, it's legally reclaiming it across international boundaries. While Sandra tracked the digital trail, Fred worked his law enforcement connections. He arranged a video conference with contacts at Interpol and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, speaking in the clipped, precise language of international investigations. We need to move carefully, he told me after one such call. If Matt gets wind of official involvement before we're ready, he could disappear with whatever funds remain. Will they help us? I asked. They're interested, he said cautiously. Especially since this involves embezzlement from Matt's firm. That elevates it from a domestic dispute to international financial crime. By Wednesday afternoon, we had unexpected reinforcements. Matt's former assistant, Penny, arrived at the house, clutching a USB drive and looking nervous. I didn't know if I should come forward, she explained as we sat in the living room. But after Detective Romano interviewed me, I started thinking about odd things Matt asked me to do over the past year. The USB drive contained copies of documents she'd been asked to file, client records with discrepancies, unexplained transfers, backdated authorizations. He always had an explanation, Penny said, twisting her hands in her lap. Said it was special handling for our high-net-worth clients. I believed him because, well, he was so convincing. He's good at that, I acknowledged, feeling a strange kinship with this woman who had also been deceived by Matt's confidence. Sandra pounced on Penny's documents like a prospector finding gold. This is exactly what we needed, she exclaimed. Direct evidence linking him to the embezzled client. Funds. By Thursday morning, Romano had coordinated with Matt's firm to gather additional evidence. The company was eager to cooperate, both to recover their stolen funds and to minimize potential damage to their reputation. They're offering resources, Romano reported. Legal team, forensic accountants, whatever we need. Why are they being so helpful? I asked, suspicious of their motives. Self-interest, Fred explained bluntly. They want to show their victims, not accomplices. And they want their money back before clients discover it's missing. While the adults built the legal case, Poppy continued her own investigation. She'd created an elaborate chart tracking Rosie's social media activity, noting patterns and connections I would never have spotted. Look at this, Mom, she said Thursday afternoon, showing me her tablet. Rosie keeps tagging this place called Blue Horizon Marina in her posts. And she's been talking to someone named Gino in the comments. He works there. See? She pointed to an exchange on a photo of a sleek powerboat. Rosie had commented, Dream Ride. And someone called Gino had replied, All set for Saturday. Sunset cruise as discussed. She's planning a boat trip, Poppy concluded. Without Dad. She hasn't tagged him in 3 days. I showed the exchange to Fred, who immediately called Romano. We need to find out about this marina, this boat, he said. If they're planning to move, we need to be ready. Romano made some calls, then returned with new information. Blue Horizon Marina caters to wealthy tourists. They offer private charters to neighboring islands and countries, including Mexico and Honduras. Non-extradition countries, Fred noted grimly. Exactly. And there's a charter booked for this Saturday in Rosie's name, one way to Honduras. The implications were clear. She's planning to leave him, I said, to take the money and run. Or they're planning to leave together, using separate names. To avoid detection, Fred countered. Either way, our timeline just accelerated. Friday morning, the third day when Matt had promised to return Poppy's college fund, dawned with tense anticipation. I checked the new account we'd set up constantly, but no transfer appeared. At 10 a.m., Matt finally called. I'm working on it, he said without preamble. Banking regulations are making it complicated. I need another day or two. That wasn't our agreement, I replied, following the script Fred and Romano had prepared for this likelihood. I know, Matt sounded genuinely frustrated. But it's not simple to move that much money internationally without raising flags. You managed it just fine when you took it, I pointed out. That was different. Look, I'm trying here. Lucia, trust me. The irony of him asking for trust was almost laughable. But I stuck to the plan. One more day, I conceded. Then I want to see progress. You will, he promised. By the way, has Poppy asked about me? The question caught me, off guard. What? Poppy. Does she talk about me? Ask when I'm coming back? The manipulation was so transparent it made my blood boil. He was trying to use Poppy's love as leverage to soften me up. She's focused on her schoolwork, I said coldly. On moving forward, there was a pause. Right. Well, tell her I'm thinking about her. After he hung up, I relayed the conversation to the team gathered in my kitchen. He's stalling, Romano concluded, probably trying to move assets before making any commitment. Or waiting for this charter boat on Saturday, Fred added. We can't wait any longer. Time to accelerate. How? I asked. Fred turned to Sandra. Is everything in place with the financial monitoring? She nodded. As of this morning, any attempt to access his known accounts will trigger an alert. The bank in Belize is cooperating quietly. They don't want to be seen harboring illicit funds. And the documentation for the warrant? Ready, Romano confirmed. We just need final approval from the judge, which should come through this afternoon. Fred turned to me. Now we need to apply pressure. Make him nervous enough to make a mistake, but not so nervous that he abandons everything and runs. How do I do that? You call him back, Fred said, and tell him you know about the boat. I stared at my father. Won't that tip our hand completely? Not if you play it right, Romano explained. Don't mention Honduras or official investigations. Just the boat trip. Make it sound like you're jealous or suspicious of Rosie. The goal is to create tension between them, Fred added. If they start doubting each other, they're more likely to act impulsively. I glanced at Poppy, who had been listening intently from her perch on the counter stool. What do you think, Detective? Would that work? She considered the question with surprising seriousness. Dad hates when he's not in control. If he thinks Rosie is making plans without him, he'll get really mad. Out of the mouths of babes, Fred murmured. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for another performance. Okay, let's call him back. This time, when Matt's face appeared on my screen, I didn't give him a chance to speak first. I know about the boat, Matt, I said, letting anger color my voice. The Sunset Charter to Honduras. Is that where my daughter's college fund is going? Financing your little getaway with Rosie? His expression shifted from confusion to alarm. What are you talking about? Don't insult my intelligence, I snapped. Blue Horizon Marina, Saturday departure, one-way tickets. The blood drained from his face. Lucia, I don't know what. Save it, I interrupted. I thought we had an agreement. 3 days, you said. But instead of returning the money, you're planning another escape. Listen to me, he said urgently. If Rosie booked a charter, she did it without telling me. We're not going anywhere. His confusion seemed genuine, which confirmed our suspicion. Rosie was planning to leave him behind. Sure, Matt, just like you didn't plan to leave us? I laughed bitterly. Forgive me if I don't believe a word you say anymore. I'll call you back, he said abruptly, ending the call. Fred and Romano exchanged satisfied glances. Hook set, Fred said quietly. Now we wait for the panic. The aftermath of my revelation about the boat charter was immediate and dramatic. Within 20 minutes of our call, Sandra's laptop pinged with alerts. He's moving money, she announced, eyes fixed on her screen. Multiple transfers initiated from the Belize account. Fred leaned over her shoulder, studying the data. Where's it going? Attempting withdrawal to cash, she replied. And trying to access the cryptocurrency wallets we flagged yesterday. Romano explained that the bank was applying the delaying protocols they had discussed. They would process Matt's requests, but slowly, creating technical difficulties that would buy us a few hours at most. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Romano coordinated with local authorities in Belize, arranging for surveillance at both the bank and the marina. Sandra monitored the financial transactions, tracking each attempt Matt made to access his hidden funds. Around noon, my phone rang. Matt's face appeared on the screen, his expression thunderous. Put him on speaker, Fred instructed, positioning himself out of camera view. What the hell are you trying to pull? Matt demanded without preamble. His usual smooth confidence was gone, replaced by barely controlled anger. I don't know what you mean, I replied, keeping my voice level. Don't play dumb, Lucia. Suddenly, all my accounts are experiencing technical difficulties. Right after you mention a boat charter I knew nothing about. I'm not responsible for your banking problems, Matt. Maybe it has something to do with how you obtained that money in the first place? What have you done? Are you working with the authorities? I told you my terms, I said, deflecting the question. Return Poppy's college fund, pay off the fraudulent credit cards, sign over the house. There is no escape to Honduras, he shouted. Rosie booked that charter without telling me. She was planning to leave me, take the money and run. His laugh was bitter. Ironic, right? The same thing I did to you. Our exchange grew more heated until I finally revealed that Matt's firm was already cooperating with the investigation into the missing client funds. All color drained from his face. What investigation? What are you talking about? I allowed myself. A small, satisfied smile. Did you really think they wouldn't notice, Matt? Penny has been very helpful, by the way. Provided copies of everything. Matt's expression cycled rapidly through shock, anger, and finally calculation. Look, we can work this out. I can return the college fund today. Right now. Just tell me this isn't official yet. It's a little late for that, I said, allowing doubt to creep into my voice. Things have progressed. Nothing's irreversible, Matt insisted. For Poppy's sake, give me a chance to fix this. I'll transfer the college fund immediately. Full. Amount? After pretending to consider, I agreed. I'll need to see the money first, all of it, in Poppy's account. Then maybe we can talk about next steps. Done, Matt agreed quickly. I'm logging in now. You'll have the full amount within the hour. Less than 40 minutes later, Sandra's laptop pinged with an alert. Transfer initiated to Poppy's account, she announced. Full amount of the college fund, $43,782. I felt a rush of emotion as I verified the deposit. Poppy's future returned. But I knew better than to celebrate yet. What else is he doing? Fred asked. Multiple transactions, Sandra replied. He's liquidating everything, converting to cryptocurrency, trying to move funds through a series of digital wallets. Her expression was grim. He's preparing to disappear. When Matt called back to confirm the transfer, he tried to buy more time, promising to make everything right. I informed him that Rosie was at the airport according to her Instagram, apparently cutting her losses and starting fresh, just as he had done to us. His expression confirmed he hadn't known. As his face hardened with anger, he issued a veiled threat about what would happen if I was working with authorities. He's threatening you now, Fred noted grimly after I ended the call. That changes things. Romano nodded agreement. We have enough. I'm calling the judge for the final authorization. As they mobilized, I sat down next to Poppy, who had been watching everything with those observant eyes that missed nothing. Is it almost over? She asked. I put my arm around her shoulders. Almost. Your college fund is back. That's the most important thing. She leaned against me. It's not just about the money, Mom. It's about making him face what he did. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. By late Friday afternoon, my living room had transformed into a fully operational command center. Romano had brought in additional colleagues, a tech specialist named Seth who monitored digital communications, and a liaison officer coordinating with authorities in Belize. Sandra continued tracking financial movements, calling out updates, as Matt made increasingly desperate attempts to move his remaining funds. "He's trying to withdraw cash now," she reported. 10,000 from the Belize National Bank. "Status?" Fred asked. "Delayed by system errors," she replied with satisfaction. "He's been told to return tomorrow when the manager is available." I watched this coordinated effort with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The machinery of justice moved with impressive precision, but also with a certain ruthlessness that left me unsettled. Romano approached with news that Judge Watkins had signed off on everything. "We have full authorization to proceed with the coordinated action tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Belize time. That's 4 a.m. our time." "We need one more call," Fred explained when I asked about my role. "To position Matt exactly where we want him, at the bank, attempting to access those funds in person." "He won't believe that," I protested. "Not after everything that's happened." "He will if you give him the right motivation," Sandra interjected. "Desperation makes people believe what they want to hear." "And right now, Matt is desperate," Romano confirmed. "Rosie has apparently left the country. She boarded a flight to Mexico City an hour ago, taking about $50,000 with her." The plan was precise. I would call Matt at 10 p.m., telling him I'd consulted my lawyer who advised me that a criminal case could take years with no guarantee of recovery. Instead, I was willing to settle matters privately, if he could transfers the remaining money immediately the next morning. As the team continued preparations, I stepped onto the back porch, needing a moment alone. Fred joined me a few minutes later, offering coffee. "Are you having doubts?" he asked. "Not about whether Matt deserves consequences," I admitted, "but about all of this. It feels excessive." "White-collar criminals count on that reaction," Fred observed. "They bank on their victims feeling uncomfortable with the full force of justice." He shared an unexpected personal story about finding letters after my mother died, revealing she had once considered leaving him during a difficult period in their marriage. "For a while, I couldn't reconcile the wife I thought I knew with the woman who wrote those responses," he said. "Eventually, I realized there was nothing to reconcile. Both versions were true. People contain multitudes, Lucia. Matt is the man you loved and the man who betrayed you. Both realities exist simultaneously." His willingness to adapt the plan if I was uncomfortable touched me deeply. This was not the rigid father I remembered. "I'll do it," I decided. Not for revenge, but for justice. For Poppy. As we headed back inside, Poppy met us at the door with an idea. "Dad doesn't trust Mom anymore, but he might still trust me." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You're 10 years old. This is not your responsibility." "Your mother's right," Fred agreed gently. "This part is for adults to handle." As the evening progressed, final preparations were made. Seth set up recording equipment. Sandra prepared detailed notes on which accounts to mention. Romano coordinated with the team in Belize. At 9:45 p.m., Fred gathered everyone for a final briefing, and I prepared to make the call that would set our final trap. I glanced at Poppy, who watched with those observant eyes that missed nothing. Whatever happened tomorrow, we would face it together, mother and daughter, stronger than before. The alarm jolted me awake at 3:15 a.m., though I'd barely slept. The house was already buzzing with quiet activity, Romano conferring with his team. In Belize via video call, Sandra monitoring account activity, Fred reviewing final details with Seth. "He's on the move," Sandra announced as I entered the kitchen. "Matt just called for a taxi to take him to the bank. He'll be there when they open at 6 a.m. local time. My late-night call had worked. I'd told Matt exactly what he wanted to hear, that I was willing to settle everything privately if he could transfer the remaining money immediately. His relief had been palpable, his gratitude effusive. He'd promised to be at the bank first thing in the morning, to wire everything he owed me, and more. A lie for a lie. Appropriate somehow. At precisely 5:55 a.m. Belize time, Romano's phone pinged with an alert. Visual confirmation. He's approaching the bank. Fred gestured for me to join him at Romano's laptop. On screen, grainy security footage showed Matt pacing outside the bank's entrance, checking his watch repeatedly. When the doors opened, he rushed inside, heading straight for a teller. "He's making his move," Romano narrated, attempting to withdraw $75,000 in cash and initiate a wire transfer with the remainder. We watched in tense silence as Matt argued with the teller, who appeared to be following the planned protocol, apologizing, explaining delays, offering to get a manager. Matt's body language grew increasingly agitated. Then suddenly, everything happened at once. Two plainclothes officers approached Matt from behind. A uniformed officer appeared at the bank entrance. Matt seemed to sense the trap. He turned, spotted the officers, and made a desperate dash toward a side door. He didn't make it 3 steps before the officers intercepted him. Even without audio, we could see him protesting, struggling briefly, before being restrained. "Target secured," came the confirmation through Romano's phone. "All funds frozen. Evidence collected." A collective exhale filled my kitchen. It was over. "Mom?" Poppy appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Did they get him?" I nodded, unable to find words for the complex emotions swirling within me. "Good," she said simply, climbing onto my lap in a way she hadn't done since she was much younger. "Now we can start over." The days following Matt's arrest passed in a blur of legal procedures, financial recovery, and emotional processing. Matt was extradited back to the United States within a week, facing multiple federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. His company moved quickly to distance themselves, issuing press releases about their cooperation with authorities and their commitment to making clients whole. Matt's name was scrubbed from their website, his office cleaned out, his very existence erased from corporate memory. I found myself in the strange position of having received justice without feeling the satisfaction I'd expected. Part of me still mourned the man I thought I'd married, the father I believed Poppy had. That grief coexisted alongside anger, relief, and a tentative hope for our future. Poppy, remarkably, seemed to be processing things more healthily than I was. She asked straightforward questions about her father's crimes, listened carefully to the answers, and then moved forward with the resilience only children possess. "Will Dad go to jail?" she asked one evening as I tucked her in. "Yes," I answered honestly. "For several years, probably." She nodded, considering this. "Can I write to him? Not right away, but someday?" The question caught me off guard. "If you want to, yes. That would be your choice." "I think I might," she said thoughtfully. "Not because I forgive him, but because I want him to know I'm okay, despite what he did." My father, who had been staying with us through the ordeal, gradually began preparing to return to his own home. The night before his departure, we sat on the back porch after Poppy was asleep, sharing a bottle of wine and memories long buried. "You did good, Lucia," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Better than good." "I had help," I reminded him. "I couldn't have done this without you." He shook his head. "You would have found a way. You always do. You're a Martinelli." The simple pride in his voice healed something broken between us, a bridge rebuilt over the chasm of years and misunderstandings. 6 months later, life had found a new rhythm. The divorce was finalized with Matt signing papers from his prison cell, The house was legally mine, the fraudulent credit card debt discharged, and with Fred's help, I'd launched a small graphic design firm that was already gaining clients. Poppy thrived in her new public school, joining the science club and developing an interest in forensic investigation that both amused and concerned me. She and Fred video called weekly, their bond stronger than ever. On a crisp Saturday morning, as Poppy and I prepared for Fred's visit, she brought me her tablet, showing me a letter she'd written to Matt but never sent. "What do you think?" she asked, her expression serious. "Is it okay?" I read it carefully. A child's straightforward account of her life now, neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply factual. She told him about school, about her science projects, about visits with Grandpa, Fred. She ended with a simple statement. "What you did was wrong, but I'm going to be okay anyway." "It's perfect," I told her, blinking back tears. "Absolutely perfect." Fred arrived bearing gifts, a professional camera for me. "For your design work," he insisted, and a junior forensics kit for Poppy that made her squeal with delight. As we sat down to lunch, I looked at this small, reconstituted family, my daughter, emerging stronger from trauma, my father, softened by second chances, myself, rebuilding from ashes. The college fund that had started everything was secure again, but it seemed almost secondary now to the more valuable lessons we'd gained. "What?" Fred asked, catching my thoughtful gaze. "Just thinking about unexpected blessings," I said. "How sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important reconciliations." Poppy nodded sagely, her 10-year-old wisdom once again taking me by surprise. "Like Grandpa says, it's not what happens to you that matters. It's how you respond to it." Fred raised his glass in a toast. "To responding with courage." "And family," Poppy added. "And justice," I concluded, completing our circle. Some losses can never be recovered, some betrayals never fully healed. But sitting there with my daughter and my father, I understood that new foundations could be built on even the most broken ground. Stronger foundations, perhaps, for having survived the breaking. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.